Good morning, and thank you for inviting us to be with you. I'm Mac. This is Catherine. Just a curiosity question. How many of you have revised either your sign ordinance or your panhandling ordinance since 2015? Show of hands. Not very many. Okay, then this is a target-rich environment for us. If you have not revised your sign ordinance or your panhandling ordinance since 2015, I'm going to guess for you that big parts of it are unconstitutional. That ought to concern you. You ought to be writing down the name of your city or town attorney right now. So what we want to do is talk you through, just briefly, the case law, and then a practical guide to how you can go about revising those ordinances to be in compliance and to not be in trouble. Now, the way we're going to divide this up is that Catherine is going to tell you the smart stuff, and I'm going to tell you the practical stuff. So let's start with Catherine telling you the smart stuff.
So, thanks, Mac. I will start with the smart stuff, which in this case is a brief review of the Supreme Court case in 2015 that really changed the way courts and therefore municipalities look at the way they are regulating free speech issues. So just as a basic overview, courts review very closely any attempt by a government entity to regulate the speech of its people. So in this case that came in front of the Supreme Court, the issue was how signs were being regulated. So the sign ordinance. Show of hands, how many of y'all know how your municipality regulates its signs?
Pretty good smattering.
Yep. And in this case, the town of Gilbert actually regulated through a permitting process, which I think most towns and cities are comfortable with. The permitting process had exceptions, though. There were 23 different types of signs for various things that didn't require a permit. The problem really was that depending on what kind of sign you were, and I'm not talking about flags versus poles, but the message that you were conveying, farmers markets on Saturday mornings, political signs, ideology signs, and temporary signs, you had different regulations. So different sizes that were allowed, different times that the sign could be up. And what the court found was this was regulating a sign based on the content of its message. Now, previously, I think municipalities and cities felt fairly comfortable regulating a sign based on what type of sign it was, an entrance sign, an exit sign, a temporary sign, as long as there was no intention behind the regulation that was an intention to keep certain groups from speaking and other groups from not speaking. But this court case said it doesn't really matter what your intentions are. It doesn't matter if you're aiming your regulation at a specific group or a group that wishes to put up a sign or a specific message. If you are regulating the sign based on what the sign says, regardless of who's saying it, you are regulating it based on its content, and we can't do that. So that was the big change in 2015. So if you can't do that, how do you properly regulate signs? There's still going to be an issue as to what signs are allowed, when and where. And the key from this case and moving forward, and you'll hear us say repeatedly, is time, place, and manner restrictions. Speech can be regulated based not on who's saying what or what is being said, but based on what time it can be said, what times the signs can be up if they're temporary signs, the places they may be posted, and the manner. This is size, type of material, things like that. So that is the basis of everything else we're going to be telling you today. And in general, because this is going to apply to more speech than just signs, the thing that I want you to remember is, if you have to hear what someone is saying or read the message to know whether or not it falls under a regulation, you are regulating it based on its content, and we can't do that.
So that's the gist of a 90-page Supreme Court opinion. If you have to read it to know how to regulate it, you're probably wrong. That's the way it works. All right, so let's translate time, place, and manner into things that we're used to. Time. For signs, it means it's either temporary or permanent. Time. Place. Usually that's going to be what zone it's in or what land use it applies to, like a restaurant. So we say it's in a zone and it's a restaurant, so that's place. And then third, manner. This could be sign, size, number, construction. Is it lighted? Is it lighted on the inside? Is it lighted from the outside? It's basically things that have nothing to do with what it says. All right, so let's use some examples to walk you through, just to give you a feel for what this looks like. This is getting from old sign language to new sign language. So, old sign language, you might have a rule that says you can have one tenant identification sign per business in a multi-unit building. And it would say something like McCarley and Clodfelter Law Firm. All right, the new language will say you can have one sign per entrance on a building that houses one or more non-residential units. You can't tell me it has to say McCarley and Clodfelter, and in fact, we can put anything we want to on it. All right, time, place, and manner. Time, it's a permanent sign. Place, it's on a multi-tenant, non-residential building. And the manner, you can have one of them and it's on the building. And we can say anything we want. Now, our economic self-interest is that we're going to say McCarley and Clodfelter. Oh, I'm sorry, that would offend my bosses. It's going to say Parker Poe. So it'll say what we need it to say, but we could just as easily say, have a nice day. All right, next example, flags of the United States. Most of our ordinances, and we've looked at a bunch of them, most ordinances say you can have the U.S. flag, a state flag, a local flag, and a flag of the entity that's in the building. We can't do that anymore. Now it has to say you can have 4 flags on any non-residential property. All right, time, place, and manner. Time, it's a permanent regulation. Place, it's non-residential property. And the manner, we've told you how many you can have, and we're probably going to tell you what the size limit is. Although if any of you have a Camping World RV sales lot in your jurisdiction, you now know that they like to fly flags the size of a football field. And that's getting litigated in some parts of the country. Next example. A drive-in restaurant, McDonald's. We used to say you could have an entrance and exit sign, a business identification sign, that's McDonald's and the Golden Arches, and a menu board. Well, all of those are content-based. The new regs are going to say you can have 2 signs no larger than 2 feet by 3 feet at each driveway onto the property, and 1 monument or pole sign as allowed in the zone, and 1 additional sign which can have 2-way communication capability. Back to the basics. Time, it's a permanent sign. Place, it's a drive-through restaurant in the appropriate zone, and we've told you where the signs can go. And then the manner, we've regulated the number, probably regulate the size, and we've said one of them can have 2-way communication. One more example, gas stations and the fuel island canopies. We used to say that you could have those and that it had to identify the gasoline or fuel products or the name of the store. Now it'll say you can have signs on a fuel island canopy, and they can be no larger than 1/4 of the area of the side of the canopy, and you can only have 2 of them. Time, place, and manner. It's a permanent sign. Business that sells gas. It's on the fuel island canopy. And we've told you how many you can have, what size they can be, and probably have some regulations about lighting. Now, the reality is they're going to put Shell on it or BP or whatever else. But there's nothing we can do if they'd rather say stop the war or have a nice day or thank you Jesus or anything else. We can no longer regulate content, and what we now have to say is we are relying on their own economic self-interest that they will put on the sign what logically goes on the sign, which in the fuel island canopy case means the brand of gasoline, because they want you to stop at their Shell station. Next, let's talk a little bit about process. That's the piece that's really important for elected officials. First rule, there is no one size that fits all. You can't just copy the sign revision from a neighboring community and call it a day. You're going to have to pass a test that says you have narrowly tailored this regulation to fit your community and the issues that exist for you. So you're probably going to have a team doing this that includes your manager, your planning people, and your town or city attorney. And you may have a consultant from outside working with you on it too. First thing that has to happen is that the governing board has to buy into the fact that we have a problem and we need to fix it, because this is going to take some time. You're going to have to do a study of the community, figure out what the sign issues are in your jurisdiction, and how to translate each of those sign issues into the new speak for sign regulations. And if we're all honest about what our sign regulations are today, we would admit that most of them are a collection of one-off fixes for things that occurred. When people started with blinking signs, blinking portable signs, we all made rules that said you couldn't put those in the right-of-way. When car dealers came out with massive American flags, we'd make a rule that said they had to be a reasonable size so they don't distract drivers. When the digital boards came out, we all made a rule about how long or short the message had to stay on the sign. Almost everything we've got in our ordinance has a title to it that tells you what the problem was that created the rule. Almost all of those need to be changed. You're going to start with a survey of the community to see what signs exist and what issues exist in your community. You're going to want to involve the people that can help you. In most cases, that'll be something like a Chamber of Commerce or a Merchants Association, because the folks who care about signs care a lot. There are a number of business entities that either do depend on the signs or think they depend on the signs, and that's going to include car dealers, fast food franchises, convenience stores, realtors, and developers. You need to convince them pretty quickly we're not going to make your signs go away. You're not going to have to replace them. They can be grandfathered in. And once you've said that, the temperature in the room goes down considerably. The sign companies, interestingly enough, figure out pretty quickly that this is not going to hurt their business and may in fact help. But who does come out to tell you what they think about this is the Sierra Club and probably some neighborhoods that back up to commercial corridors. They're going to care about what the sign regulations say. And you're going to need to be able to deal with those folks. Be realistic about what this is going to cost you in time or money or irritation, and it will be some of all three of those. It'll take several months to do the study of the community, to rewrite the provisions, to have them in front of the planning board and then in front of you. And it's probably going to take some staff resources, and if you choose to go outside for a consultant, then that will be cash on the table. Last thing to mention, it needs to be an open and honest process. If the constituencies who care about this sense that you're just going through the motions, they won't have confidence in the process and won't be supportive of the final product. Catherine's going to now give you a couple of specifics on the litigation that's occurred in your state and around the country to give you a feel for that. Catherine?
Thanks, Mac. So, as I mentioned earlier, the case in 2015 was very broad and has had some very broad implications. Signs are just one type of speech that your constituents engage in daily. Another one that has become a very hot issue and attracting a lot of litigation and a lot of uncertainty is regulation of the activity of either begging, panhandling, solicitation for funds, however you define it or want to define it in an ordinance.
Curiosity question. How many of you either have a panhandling ordinance or wish you had a panhandling ordinance? All right, let me just tell you very bluntly. We've been invited here for one reason and one reason only. We don't live in Arkansas. We don't depend on any one of you for our paycheck, so we may say this as bluntly as we need to. You cannot have a panhandling ordinance in Arkansas. Darn, off the front row. Yes. We'll talk at the end of this about a couple of things that you can do, but our total job here is to say to you, you cannot go back home and pass an ordinance whose intent is to outlaw panhandling. You cannot do it. It's unconstitutional. And worse than that, there are local groups, statewide groups, and national groups sitting there ready to sue you if you do it. Just ask the folks in Hot Springs. You can't do it. All right, we've now done what we were sent here to do. Catherine, say something smart.
So the reason that we can't do it, to give you a little more context and a better understanding, if you think back to what we said about the 2015 case, the rule is if you have to hear what someone's saying to know whether or not you are regulating them, that's a content-based regulation and it's likely unconstitutional. It used to be that panhandling, being described as asking for charitable contribution or asking for money, wasn't seen as content-based because a city didn't really care who's doing the asking or what the money is for. But what the court clarified in 2015 is that because you are specifying that the request, the speech, is for money or for charity or for a contribution, you have singled out a type of speech, a type of request, and that content cannot be regulated, most likely. So what can you do? We will again apply the same lessons that we learned in sign ordinances now into the speech context of panhandling, solicitation, distribution, those sorts of activities that are generally regulated together, though they might have very different, what is seen as community problems. Again, there's no one-size-fits-all solution. Just because an ordinance in a neighboring city or state might be upheld, it probably won't, and most definitely in this situation, work if you just drop it in your own ordinance code. You have to understand the issues apart from the actual request for money that are causing problems in your municipality. So is that traffic problems? Are there safety problems? And as you'll see, there might be different problems based on what intersection you're at. If you're on the street downtown, if you're in a highway area where cars are going over 45 miles an hour, all of these are considerations of the kind of problems you might have, and you can target those issues and those problems without having to even think about panhandling or solicitation.
If you're sued, what you're going to have to prove in court is that you had a very specific problem and that you came up with a narrowly tailored, magic words, narrowly tailored remedy to fix that problem. And if you can't do that, you lose. So that means you've got to have good data to support what you do. The kind of problem areas that we've seen in different cities that relate to this panhandling issue are the concern around busy intersections and panhandlers standing in the median approaching drivers when they pull up to a stop sign or a stoplight. We also hear from downtown merchants who don't like the fact that panhandlers are either blocking the sidewalk or blocking the door to their business or hanging around the outdoor eating areas of places that have those. And we also hear about concerns with people going to a parking deck or some secluded place late at night and being followed by someone they don't know and causing apprehension. So your police officers, I promise you, your police officers know these locations and know the people involved and can help you build a record. But they can also tell you sometimes that although it's irritating, there's not a literal safety problem. And if there's not a safety problem, irritation won't do it. And again, I get to speak bluntly because I don't live here. You have to be able to separate true problem from prejudice. And the fact that some people don't like to see homeless people begging doesn't constitute a constitutional problem. It's an irritant, but it's not something that you're allowed to go after just because it bothers people. It's got to be a genuine problem of safety or concern.
So let's say you do identify through speaking with your police department, looking at data, specific safety issues that are happening around your community. What do you do? How do you start the process? And how do you draft an ordinance? what we advise and what we found to be the best practice for places around the country is to find the interested community groups first who are going to help you build an ordinance. This takes time, and it might seem like you're going to run up against a bit of a fight at first, but it's much better to bring folks to the table who have an interest in what's going on. These are going to be homeless advocacy groups, business owners, and of course your own police department who's going to be on the ground day to day enforcing any ordinance you might come up with.
The minute you say you're interested in looking at panhandling as an issue, the state and local and national interests who care about this on the homeless side will show up, and it will instantly become a conversation more about homelessness than about panhandling. We have seen the National Law Center on Homelessness and Poverty in each of the locations we've been to. They will usually partner up with the state ACLU and a local legal aid group to represent individual clients and plaintiffs in your jurisdiction. And the best answer is embrace them, bring them in, have the conversation. You'll also get some issues that have to do with private property. For example, a shopping center. Well, the shopping center can say things that you can't. They can say no solicitation on our property. But what that does is simply move it out to the sidewalk, your sidewalk, in front of the shopping center, and now you still have to regulate that. If you have the conversation, you will hear about the Homeless Bill of Rights. You will hear about the requests from the national organizations that instead of restricting panhandling, you deal with the root causes of homelessness or services. And some good ideas have come from communities that have had those conversations. For example, one of the complaints people have, particularly downtown merchants, is that some homeless people are urinating on the back of their building or in other public places. Several communities have simply built a downtown public bathrooms to try and solve some of those problems. So you're in for a conversation about more than just panhandling. It will get into all the issues that have to do with homelessness, housing, supportive services, public restrooms, and the Homeless Bill of Rights. Be realistic about what this is going to cost you in time and money and irritation. You have to be committed to the process, and you're going to have lots of folks interested in it as you go down the road. I want you to compare your cost of doing it right to the cost of doing it wrong. And the cost of doing it wrong, as you can ask the folks in Hot Springs, is that you may get sued. In fact, you're likely to get sued. Not as much on the sign ordinance issue, but very likely on the panhandling issue, simply because of the state and national groups that care about this. So our encouragement to you is if you want to do something about it, and you're going to try and go through the study, bring everybody in, commit to the process, and do it right. Now, you're probably thinking, well, if we can't have a strict panhandling prohibition, what can we do? And Catherine's going to tell you the smart things you can do.
So it might be that the safety issues you come up with when you study the data show you the problems that are in your municipality are actually already solvable through other ordinances in place that maybe you just haven't thought are applicable to the situation or need to be relooked at. There are plenty of Arkansas state laws, harassment laws, disorderly conduct laws, coercion laws, assault laws, and then even in your own individual municipalities, most places have, or you can easily draft ordinances about impeding traffic, both for pedestrians and for motor vehicles. And those really get to the safety issues that are brought up the most often when you're talking about solicitation and panhandling issues. So do look to the ordinances you already have, the state laws you already have, and these are state laws that other courts have pointed to when they're saying you don't need to regulate panhandling or you can't regulate panhandling. You can already take care of the problems that you are claiming to have through state laws.
So, to sum it up, you cannot have an ordinance prohibiting panhandling. I know you're sad, but there are alternatives. Enforce state law, and if you have specific issues that you can document the problem, issues downtown, issues at specific intersections, issues in the parking decks. You can approach those if you do it very carefully in a studied process and come up with a constitutionally supportable ordinance. We've got about 2 minutes left. Does anybody have any questions or want to moan about the fact that you can't have a prohibition? All right, we've done our job. I'm Mac, she's Catherine. Thanks for letting us come.